Hello, and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe,
And I'm Dave.
and we're back. It's a new year, and it's a new show, and it's going to be absolutely fantastic, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course.
And how is your Christmas and New Year, Dave?
It was good. I spent it mostly relaxing and just getting some time to myself.
Nice, nice, much needed, I'm sure, especially with
Yeah,
everything else that's been going on in the world today. Ours was
yeah.
a little bit quieter than we'd planned for. We'd actually been isolating for a couple of months before Christmas just to make sure that we were 100% safe, not even got a cold to see all of our family. And then, 5 days before or whatever it was, no, everyone can't do anything. You're not allowed to leave your zone. That's okay, great.
Yeah, they did that here in Wales. I think you guys had a little more notice than we did, but basically we got an announcement at 6 p.m. to say from midnight that night it would be locked down.
It's just ridiculous, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, what can we do? I'd rather we were all safe. It's just a shame that, well, we'd spent so time being extra careful so that we could go and do things, and because of others, it was ruined. But isn't it always the way?
Always the way.
Ah. So tonight we are just doing a quick stream. It's to do with the feedback on morality and misconceptions. So if you remember, I did a little video a while ago. It was basically a little PowerPoint presentation of various slides of very quick bits about morality. This is what subjective means, this is what objective means, this is what normative means. And we got a fair bit of feedback from different people. And I'm hoping that I can answer some of the questions here tonight. And any that come in through the chat, please let us know. I'm willing to answer any and all. I have also made a few tweaks to the slides. I'm not going to be displaying those tonight, but they'll go out in the final product once I, put the final touches on it. Some of it was changing the order, for example. The normative versus descriptive bit, that's now comes before the definitions of subjective and relative. It was one of the things before I actually did it. I was umming and ahhing about where it should be before or after. But that was one of the bits of feedback that I got, that maybe that should be before because it sort of lays a bit of groundwork for the rest. So I've moved that. I've added to and tweaked the definitions a little bit as well. Like we were talking about, Dave, with the truth maker being for someone who's subjective, the truth comes from the personal opinion, rather than there being any sort of external truth to it. So I've added like that little bit into it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, they were the tweaks, but we did have a few conversations and a few comments here and there. So I'm going to address as many of those that we can tonight. And yeah, I mean, that's what we're going to do. I figure if I read out the bits of feedback, Dave, and you put your input into it, and then if there's anything else that I feel that needs added or feel we need to discuss more, we'll go from there. How about that?
Yeah, sounds ideal.
Cool. So the first one is it, as in morality, comes down to personal judgment, and that is subjective by definition.
I mean, yeah, if it is subjective, if it's a personal judgment, but does it really come down to personal judgment? That's one of the big questions in morality, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I had a thought of, if I have a purpose of turning water to ice, I know that based on the evidence that water freezes at 0 degrees centigrade, and therefore putting it in my freezer, which is less than 0 degrees centigrade, will freeze it. So similarly with morality, if we look to the purpose and see what aids this purpose, even if you don't agree that the purpose of morality is flourishing, you can still make objective statements about what benefits this purpose.
Yeah. Well, the other thing with something like that is if somebody's going to say morality comes down to personal judgment, what happens when two moralities clash? So if that person who says it all comes down to a personal judgment, so it's subjective, if the Christian or Muslim was to say to him, morality comes from God, which one of those two is correct if it's all personal judgment?
Yeah, I mean that was one of the things we highlighted in the last video, wasn't it? You can end up with contradictions. One person saying something is okay, one person saying something isn't okay. Which is right? Well, you're both right if it's down to pure personal judgment, but do you allow them to be right, or are you going to hold them to a standard above their opinion? And I think
That's it.
that's where the problems with most people who say morality is subjective, they will then say, "Oh, but you're wrong for doing that."
Yeah.
Or this is what you should do. Well, why should you do that if it's down to personal opinion?
Or they'll say that the Bible or the Quran isn't a good source of morality. Well, it might not be to you, but it is to other people. And you can't tell them that it's not a good source of morality for them because it's all personal judgment.
So the next one is, do you have a method that we can use that shows raping babies has anything to do with morality? I really tried to say that with a straight face. I could not believe that was a question.
I mean, go for the killer, yeah. I mean, to be honest, it is kind of a valid question that you would ask somebody who says morality is subjective. Okay, then is it ever okay to torture and rape a small child for fun and leave them in a ditch?
Yeah, I mean, he was responding to a comment that I made about that, so and that's why he's turned around and said that.
Well, then, yeah, there's several methods to show. I mean, you can say, well, it's not a virtuous action, not according to virtue ethics.
Hey, LB, nice to see you.
Hey, Opie. Happy New Year to you. Yeah. So, according to utilitarianism, it doesn't exactly bring about the best outcome to rape a child. So, according to utilitarianism, it's wrong. Deontologically speaking, you're using that baby as a means to an end, a means to get yourself off. So, it would be wrong according to deontology. So, there's loads of ways to show that it's immoral according to various theories of morality. But if you're going to argue that it's all personal opinion, then you can't show that it's wrong.
Indeed. I mean, I thought when he actually asked that question, it sounded like someone who hadn't even begun to scratch the surface of morality. I mean, they're judgments on behaviors. So that is a behavior. It's an action that you're taking. So,
yep.
Yeah. And the very front bit, yes, it's a behavior. You're making a judgment on it. So there you go. How you go about that, as Dave has just explained, you can use various different moral theories as your measuring stick, if you will. Or you can just take it back to what the purpose of morality is again, which seems to be flourishing, human flourishing. So compare that action to that. Does raping a baby enable flourishing? Does it allow someone to live well and do well? I mean, really?
Yeah. Well, the other question I would ask somebody like that, because I'm going to hazard a guess here that the person that asked that was an atheist, because it's the kind of misunderstanding and misrepresentation that a lot of atheists kind of put forward on Twitter and in Facebook groups. So the question I would ask him is there anything wrong with Muhammad and Aisha?
Yeah, that's a good one, actually.
Because that's one of the main criticisms from atheists towards Islam. Well, Muhammad raped Aisha at 9 years old, so therefore he's bad. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think that I think realistically the person is trying to go for gotcha comments rather than trying to take the whole concept of morality in. It's just
He's a debate bro. He's arguing for the sake of arguing, and he's arguing to show that he can rip something apart just with a few questions. And he's trying to show that anything can be criticized. Yes, anything can be criticized, but is it good criticism?
The answer was that no.
No.
Yeah, LB said a similar thing to you as well. You know, humanism, egalitarianism, utilitarianism, philanthropy. Pick your weapon of choice. Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
there you go. There's so many different ways that you can judge it. But as I said, if you take it back to its very like bit, what is morality, or what are morals, judgments on behaviors? So,
I mean, Kant might disagree with you about the human flourishing bit. And utilitarianism doesn't necessarily go for that, but that can be brought in as a means in utilitarianism. The flourishing thing mostly comes from virtue ethics.
It does, but when I did the examination of various moral theories, it seemed to indicate. I mean, even when you go into hedonism and anything like that, it seemed to represent.
It was a common theme.
Yeah, that even if it may not have been the sole theme, it was something that then led on to flourishing. It was, well, if you're making everyone happy, yourself and everyone else happy, well, that will then allow you to flourish. And you know, it was living well and doing well, which by following these moral theories.
I just thought I'd nip it in the bud in case anybody jumped in and said, well, you know, Kantianism, no, it's all about doing universals and the right thing. And yeah.
No, that is fair enough. And I mean, there were even, when I did my analysis of it on Answers in Reason, there were some people who argued against it. You know, there are arguments against it being flourishing. It just seems to be something that is included in most moral theories, either directly or secondary or, you know, tertiary down the line. It's something that seemed to be a big part of morality.
And before anybody else says anything, human flourishing here doesn't just mean breeding like bunnies.
Look up eudaimonia. And that's not pneumonia, as we first thought. That was a funny show. LB's got a question for you, Dave. It's actually for both of us, but I'm putting it to you.
Okay.
What's the difference between humanism and humanitarianism?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually don't really know that one. Not in any great detail, anyway. I think humanitarianism is more sort of an ethos, whereas humanism is more a collection of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I might have had a misunderstanding on this one, so please forgive me if I'm wrong here. But my thought on humanism was sort of putting humans first, and humanitarian was more about kindness for, you know,
doing good deeds and
all of that. Yeah.
But I mean, humanism kind of includes that as well.
Yeah. So maybe
humanism is
slight
basically
nuance.
The idea that we only have ourselves to turn to and to figure out what's right, what's wrong, and that kind of thing. Humanitarianism it's kind of putting it in action, really, isn't it?
There you go.
Opie probably knows better than me, though.
Yeah, hopefully Opie joins us a little bit later.
Well, he's much smarter than me. Doesn't take much, but he's definitely much smarter than me.
Actually, Opie and I are going to try and do a back-to-back mix across the internet, across two different bits of software with two different bits of kit.
That'd be cool. But didn't he used to DJ in Chicago? Yeah.
He hasn't had a mix for about 6 years, and I mean, I hadn't had a mix for apart from like an odd drunken mix in the summer, for a good 3 or 4 years, I think. I was looking, I had a memory pop up on Facebook, and it was Christmas 3 and a bit years ago was the last time I actually bought new tunes. So yeah, it's been a while since I have, as I'm sure everybody who's listened to me mix knows.
You can mix better than I can.
That's only because you don't have turntables, Dave.
And also because I haven't got a fucking clue.
No, you just like press play, don't you? You know, and hit stuff and go wicka wicka.
I haven't got Winamp anymore.
That really whipped the llama's ass. I tell you what, that was definitely my favorite media player back in the day. It did everything. And the
It was awesome.
visualizations. Oh, did you ever just used to sit in a room, especially after a night out raving, just staring at the screen like,
Yeah, we all used to.
good times. Okay, so the next one for tonight. It was good, bad, right, wrong are subjective by definition, therefore morality is subjective by definition.
Okay. What does it mean to say good and bad are subjective by definition? I don't think that it's included in the actual definition of good and bad.
No.
Good and bad could just mean positive, negative.
Yep.
But yeah, I see where an argument like this is coming from, in that we all find different things good and bad. But that's not to say that there isn't such a thing as something that's bad. Poison is bad for you. You might enjoy it, but that doesn't mean it's not bad for you.
Yeah, the example that I came up with was when we were speaking of value. We were talking about it having the inherent sort of goodness or benefits to something. So to the opposite of your poison, its food is instrumental to our survival. Therefore, you can say it's good for survival. Whether you want to eat food, you like food, or you care about survival is irrelevant. You can say that food is good for survival. It doesn't matter whether you personally value it or not. So you can say the same thing for morality. If you've got the purpose of flourishing or whatever, you've got statements that you can make that are objectively good for this purpose.
Yeah. To be honest, I think this comes down to a kind of a bad argument where people say, well, there's disagreement about what it is, therefore it's subjective. Well, there's disagreements about whether evolution is true. Does that mean evolution is subjective?
Good one. Just because people disagree with something doesn't mean it's subjective. You could say
they could be
judgment
wrong.
Their judgment is completely subjective, but there is a right or wrong with that sort of thing, as you said. Someone could subjectively decide 1 + 1 is 97, but they'd be objectively wrong.
They'd be wrong, yeah. And I think that's what people forget. It is possible to be wrong about something. I know it's a harder case to argue for with something like morality, unless you're religious, because you have this grounding, but you can still take that back to, well, that's just, your argument. That doesn't compel me to, you believe in God, therefore it compels you, but it doesn't compel me.
Yeah.
And the other thing as well is with something like that, well, if good and bad is subjective, does that make religious morality good? Because some people believe it's good. So when you tell them no, religious morality is bad, it means nothing, really.
Yeah. I mean, that is, as we said on the last stream, it's the biggest pitfall for someone arguing for subjective morality, and they might have a comeback like, I can still have an opinion on it. It's like, yes, but your opinion isn't the truth maker. If it's wholly subjective, like you're saying it is, the truth maker is each individual's personal opinion on a particular behavior. So, the person that thinks religious morality is good is right, and the person that thinks religious morality is bad is right, and there you have a contradiction. And yeah, sure, you can have an opinion on each other's, but it means nothing, because what matters is the individual. So you can say you don't agree with them, but you have to agree that they are acting morally at the same time. And then you're going through crazy loops in your head to try and maintain this whole morality is subjective thing.
Yeah. I mean, you could sort of argue for error theory here, where there is no actual truth to any moral propositions. They're not actually propositions. So when somebody says something is good, they're not actually saying that it's true that this thing is good. They're just saying it's my opinion that this thing is good. But again, you're left down to the Same thing. Well, there might be no truth maker. Everything's just an opinion. So therefore, when you say religious morality is bad, all you're really saying is you don't like it.
Yeah. Oh, we've got one come in. So, question: how do we know morality exists? So we're talking about it right now. What do you mean by exists? It's a concept, so it exists conceptually. But do you mean it's a thing in the same way that this card is a thing? Well, no. I don't know. I mean, maybe you can expand on that question a little bit more for us, and we'll come back to you.
I'm wondering if he's thinking something more. Does it exist ontologically? Is it a part of the fabric of the universe? If so, that's a little bit more difficult. I mean, if you went with something like divine command theory, then it would exist ontologically because God has woven it into the fabric of the universe. But I don't quite buy that. I think it's conceptual and it exists conceptually.
Yeah. So, as Dave said, unless we're speaking of divine command theory, and divine command theory was true, then it exists as a concept. So that's it.
I
There you
mean,
go. Cool.
It's
Yeah.
been discussed for 3,000-4,000 years. So, I mean, you can date it right back to the Greeks and probably even earlier, but we have no writings on it.
Yeah.
I mean, people like Confucius used to speak about it. You know, every kind of culture has discussed morality in some sort of sense, even if they didn't use that term to describe it. They've all discussed principles of right and wrong because that's part of living in a society. Does that make sense?
Does to me. Hopefully that made sense to you as well. So the next bit. So we're carrying on with the theme. So obviously we were talking about the babies earlier, and we were talking about abuse. And the question came up was, well, abuse already implies a moral value, so it doesn't make sense to ask anyone if it can be moral. It makes more sense to ask, what do we call abuse? Which, I mean, it was a bit of a weird statement, I thought there.
I mean, yeah, you can kind of unpack it as abuse has an inherent
negative
kind of
connotation.
negative connotation. Yeah.
But then, if he's saying that there, then I mean, his earlier question. I mean, these ones so far have all been from the same person, other than the ones we've read out from the chat.
Right.
He's already gone on about how everything is wholly subjective, and how the raping babies question has nothing to do with morality, and now he's going on about how abuse already implies moral value. It's like you said earlier, it's almost someone arguing, "Hey OP, nice to see you, you're right buddy." Yeah, it's almost like someone arguing for the sake of arguing the toss.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we consider like abuse, it's a descriptive term for something being treated as negative, often cruel or in a violent way, especially with regularity. The detrimental effects are well documented. There's a psychological and physical harm and suffering. It doesn't further flourishing. So
Yeah. I mean, the question, what do we consider abuse, is still a good question. But I think that's a separate question to whether abuse is immoral. Like you said, it already implies a negative connotation and it already implies a negative value, which means that it isn't just a personal preference. If he can see that abuse carries a negative connotation, could he make abuse a good thing? If he believed abusing a baby was a good thing, even that negative connotation that abuse has wouldn't make it immoral.
yeah, I mean, I think basically leave that one there.
It's kind of a malformed question.
Yeah. He then made another statement that again, I found a little bit puzzling. Um, he says he likes the bit in the article. So this was talking about the purpose of morality and the stream that we did with about a month ago or however long it was. Saying he said, I like the bit about well-being. It means stealing from richer people is always moral. What? What? I mean, how anyone got that from anything I have written or anything like that made me um, just go,
Yeah.
what? Um, Personally, I think that you. I mean, stealing is still a negative behavior, but there could be a situation where it's the lesser of two evils.
You could justify it rather than
Yeah,
call it
yeah,
immoral. Call it moral.
yeah. So you could say morally permissible, maybe, rather than moral.
Um, I mean, under utilitarianism, you could make some kind of argument that it's okay to take a bunch of money from rich people that they won't miss to give to a bunch of poor people who need to eat. But I'm not sure you could get away with saying it's okay to steal all of somebody's money because you're not bringing about the best outcome then.
Yeah. And yeah, especially if you're just doing it for personal gain as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And under something like a universalist position, it would be wrong, outright wrong. It's wrong to steal. That's it.
um, Opie's got a question. Is martial arts training immoral? No.
No, because I used to do it. And I would never do anything immoral.
I don't know how martial arts training would be immoral. I suppose there are immoral ways training could be done. If you train people like John Kreese versus Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah. You could use martial arts immorally, but the actual training itself, no, it's I'm not sure it would be even a moral question.
Yeah. And more content, please. Yes, theft still traumatizes people. You are right. It can do. I mean, there, as Dave mentioned, there could be examples where someone wasn't aware. You know, they're so rich that you stole a couple of things and they didn't even know about it. They never knew about it, and so there was no direct harm caused to them. But you know, you steal a family heirloom that's been in there for generations, or something that someone held dear for whatever reason. Yes, you're right. There is still a form of trauma caused by that sort of thing.
I mean, here's a question for you regarding that one, though. Imagine a lawyer who was handling the will of somebody, and all of that guy's money was going to go to somebody else who didn't even know they were going to be left it, but decided to steal it instead. That family never knows anything about it. They've still been harmed, though, haven't they?
Yes, they've lost the potential. They've lost
Yeah.
the potential for doing better. I mean, you could get to a point where you justified it if he took 10% of it and hid it somewhere and altered the will and said, "Oh yeah, you know,
Yeah, but then
here's 9 million."
you've
No, I
harmed the
agree. There's
person
still a
who's left
harm.
the will. Yeah,
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 yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, no, there is still that harm there, but I'm saying, you know, there are ways where it could be less harmful.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, if you took 100 grand from Jeff Bezos and built a school in Africa somewhere to educate children and feed them, I'm not really sure any harm has been done and good has come from it. You've taken from them, but I don't think Jeff Bezos would miss 100 grand.
no, he
He
probably wouldn't.
probably finds it down the back of the sofa on that some days.
uh, so just checking the chat quickly. Unless you have to steal something back that is valuable or something that was stolen back from you, but then again, it wouldn't be stealing. So you're talking about as in you stole something from someone and then they stole that exact same thing back. I'd say they're righting a wrong, but you still did a wrong thing in the first place by stealing
Yeah.
it. You've still caused them harm. You've still made them undertake an action that they wouldn't have to otherwise do because of what you have done. So there's
If
still a
they've missed
wrong.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
If you've stolen something that they missed, then you've caused harm to them. It's you've caused emotional distress.
So the next one, it as in morality is or well-being is down to your subjective judgment, how can you measure the difference between the pleasure of raping child versus the impact on a child's well-being?
It has an impact, so you don't have to really make that thing.
Yeah, the instant point there is a negative impact. There is, I suppose, if you took again a utilitarian point of view, you could have your balancing act for where it is, but then I think there is the abuse on a child or rape on a child can be shown to have long-term detrimental effects, both psychological and emotional, as well as the harm that they experience. A lot of people who get abused go on to be abusers themselves, or they might end up killing themselves or anything like that, versus a bit of pleasure. I mean,
Not just that, consider the family whose child it is. They're going to suffer. Their pain counts towards that as well.
And so, yes, maybe you don't have a number like, 10 points of pleasure versus a million points of pain. Sorry, you don't have anything like that necessarily, but I think you can easily weigh it up and go, well, here's a bit of pleasure, here's a world of pain. And suffering, and as you say, it's not just the child, it's their family and everything like that, and the potential that they go on to harm other people as well.
He's really got to think about trying to justify raping babies is pleasurable, though, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I'm kind of worried about the guy and any children who are around him. But yeah, these are all pretty grade school kind of counters. They're counters that people who've never actually studied morality or never actually thought about morality in any way, they're the kind of counters that they make. Oh, look at how clever I am. I can say that a rapist might get more pleasure than the harm to the baby. So therefore, I've proven that it's all subjective. Well, no, I'm sorry. Go off and read a book. Come back in a little bit.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I did find that when having this conversation, it was very much. I felt like we'd already addressed a number of these things within the original stream, but clearly we hadn't. So I figured it's best to address it as well. I even invited him to come on here and discuss it with us, but yeah,
raping babies on the stream for him, I guess.
Maybe that's it. I should have advertised it with a baby.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Yeah, a simple one. Children cry when you harm them, so it's observable from the get-go. Yeah. Yeah, that's the instant one. Yes.
And even if you knocked the baby out and they couldn't feel it, you would still do internal damage to their organs.
Oh, we've got a question as well from Lollipop Shoes. Sorry, I missed that one. So if we go back to Amazon, the question is, should Jeff Bezos be made to repay given the way Amazon profited so heavily from a pandemic that it caused hardship for so many others? Or, pay their taxes.
Pay their taxes. That'd be a good start.
That'd definitely be a good start. And I agree with both of those statements. But the taxes is definitely one that I will say definitely should happen, even though I agree with both. One of them is definitely more of my opinion.
I sort of agree that when people start getting that rich or their business starts making that money, they should be made to contribute to the societies that allow them to accumulate so much wealth. They then take on sort of a social obligation to help improve that society, because in some senses, that makes their profits even better.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's good PR.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of companies do that as standard now. They've all got their carbon footprint and their entire department devoted to being more green and going paperless and all that sort. I mean, going paperless is another way just to save money as well. You get the points for, look, we've got lowered our carbon footprint, but actually think about all the printing that you're saving on. And you've got screens. Okay, the screens might cost a bit of money to run, but less so than the deforestation and the buying of the paper and the printing and all of that sort of stuff. So, yes.
Yeah. And I mean, there's an argument that could be made here where people say, oh, well, they're only doing it for show. Okay, they're only doing it for show and they're only doing it to score brownie points, but the impact that they're having is still beneficial. So let them be show offs as long as what they're doing is good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're right. If someone's doing something good just to show off that, oh, look at me, I'm such a good person, at the end of the day, they're at least still doing something good. They may not necessarily be as moral who's doing it because it's the right thing to do, but at the end of the day, it's better that people do good things for the wrong reasons than bad things.
Yeah, absolutely.
um, Next one.
Same guy, I'm guessing, from the last.
Yeah. He's very focused on the subjectivity side. So a judgment is always subjective, no matter how, his actual words were, no matter how much facts. I assume he meant how many facts you have.
Okay, 1 + 1 is 2. Is that subjective? I judge that it's correct. Is it subjective? If I judge that 1 + 1 isn't 2, does that mean 1 + 1 isn't 2, or does it just mean I'm wrong? There's plenty of judgments that aren't subjective.
Yeah.
There's plenty that are. To equate that just because you've made a value judgment doesn't necessarily mean that the judgment is that all judgments are subjective.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounded like a bad version of the is-ought problem, which was already addressed in the last stream as well, where I did the sunscreen demonstration, or the fact that food, we objectively need food to survive. Of course, you can have a subjective judgment that I don't want to eat the food. I'm not going to eat the food, but the judgment on needing food or energy of some kind to survive, it is objective. I
mean, somebody could argue here that it's not a judgment, it's a conclusion, but isn't that what judgments are? They're conclusions about the facts in front of you?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. All the facts point to this, and it means this.
Yeah. A subjective judgment is more along the lines of, I like chocolate, I like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But you can also make a judgment about whether or not a film is technically good. And that's not a subjective judgment. That's not a judgment of emotion or desire or pleasure or anything like that. It's a judgment about the technical aspects of how it's been done.
Yeah, in fact, I will go one further and say I actually really like some terrible, terrible horror films. They are so bad that they become enjoyable to watch.
Right.
Yeah, you know that, and they're absolutely awful. And maybe if they had a high budget and they got reworked, they might be better. But I think in general, it's how bad they are that makes them good again. So the subjective part of that is I like it, I enjoy it. But the objective is, well, the filming's terrible, the lines are awful, the camera angle, sound quality. Yeah, exactly. So there are two different types of judgment there, aren't there? Realistically.
Yeah, Kendall Walton kind of talks about this in his where he talks about art being objective. It's not just wholly subjective, because if you judge a cartoon as not being filmed very well, then you've made an error in judgment. Your subjective opinion might be that, well, it's not as good as a film, but it's not a film, so why are you judging it based on the idea that it's a film?
Yeah. Oh, art is scientific as well, even bad art. Interesting.
Basically kind of what I was saying.
Yeah. And yeah. I mean, we can go over that one. I could probably give you tons and tons and tons of examples about how not all judgments are subjective. If you just think about morality again, though, if we do have the purpose of morality, you can make objective statements about what is and isn't moral, but there could be a subjective part of it as whether you listen to what the evidence is telling you. If all the evidence is pointing to abuse being bad, seeing as you like abusing children so much, you can decide to ignore that, and you can have a subjective judgment. Well, it may say it's bad, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I'd hope you didn't. I'd really hope you didn't. But that is that again. You've got your two sides there, haven't you? Like I said with the film, like you've got with that with morality. So yeah, you can have an objective standard of morality. You've got various moral theories. You can choose to ignore them should you wish.
You know what these kind of arguments remind me of? Nobody can tell me I'm wrong because everything is based on individual judgment. You know, like the argument, you can't tell me I'm using a word incorrectly. I get to define how I use words.
Oh man.
Yeah. It reminds me of an argument like that. You can't tell me that a peanut butter sandwich isn't made from tacos because I get to judge. I might not put peanut butter in it, but it's still a peanut butter sandwich. It reminds me of arguments like that.
The next one is actually a good point. But again, I think it was addressed in the last stream on morality, that is. It's when do we know that we have all the relevant information to make a moral judgment?
I'm not sure we ever can know all that. There's a factor of underdetermination, always.
Yeah.
We can only go with, at best, what is available to us in anything, really.
Yeah, and that's why I explained in the last stream is we don't necessarily know that we have all the information. We may never know. That's why standards change. Like a scientific theory, new evidence doesn't necessarily mean that the theory was wrong, nor does it make that theory subjective. It just means it wasn't complete and is either updated, or it could mean that it was wrong, thrown out and rebuilt from the ground up again. You know, like the theory of evolution has changed over years. If we suddenly find something new about the process, and about a way a certain species evolves that is so different from any others, and it seems like it's got a different mechanism, it doesn't suddenly make the theory of evolution subjective. It's just incomplete. It didn't take on something that we didn't know about. So I don't know if we will ever know we have all the information. As you say, Dave, we just also have to be pragmatic about it and go, this is all the information we have, and we've looked for more and we can't find any at the moment, and this is where it points. Yeah,
I mean, if we wait until we have some kind of Cartesian certainty about everything, then we'll never be able to act. We will never, ever be able to act or do anything. We would never be able to formulate ideas, opinions, theories, because we can never know if we have all the information.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah, you're right there. If we don't know we have all the information, how can we make an objective statement? I mean, that was basically explained in the last bit anyway. You can still make an objective statement about something based on the evidence, even if you don't have all of the evidence. Again, as we said in the previous stream, objective doesn't necessarily mean correct. It means above personal opinion or based on facts. So
not influenced by feelings.
Yeah. So that's how.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of a weird statement. I don't necessarily think you need all the facts to make an objective statement. I mean, we don't have all the facts for speciation or abiogenesis, but we still go with the idea that evolution is everything that's happened since life formed.
Yeah.
And like you said, we've tinkered and tailored with the theory of evolution when we found new facts.
Yeah, I mean, more content, please, has said science is the process of observing change. I mean, that is a key fact of science, isn't it? But, you know... I
think the problem isn't not having all the information and acting on it. The problem is when you come across new information and you think, well, I'm not going to accept that and I'm not going to change according to that. I'm just going to go with what I already know, and that's everything that I need to know. Think of the discussion we were having the other day with the guy in the group. Christians were the first atheists. Well, no, they
Yeah,
weren't. And when he was presented with new information, it was, oh, you're just performing a gish gallop. You're wrong. You're wrong.
yeah,
Even though sources were cited and information was given, it was, no, I'm the one that's right.
yeah, yeah. And
That's
when he was
that's
talking about different definitions, no, there's only this definition. Okay, well, here's a few articles showing that there's a number of different definitions. See, this one says my definition, I'm right.
yeah.
No, you're right that it is one of the definitions. It's not the only one. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem isn't not having all the information. We should always think we don't have all the information and always think, well, perhaps any new information we're given is correct. I should look into this. The problem is going, oh, that's new information, and I'm not going to accept it because it doesn't agree with what I already think.
Yeah.
It's not adapting to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. The next one, he came up with, I sort of agree with, and he gave a critique that I have a bit of tunnel vision on the purpose of morality being flourishing, and I sort of agree that I do, but that is because of me looking into all the different aspects of morality and whether it is, you know, your first purpose or it's a secondary or tertiary effect of it. Flourishing always seems to be there as part of it, apart from things like non-cognitive and emotivists and subjectivists and things like that. So it's it's because of the people over from thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I don't know if there's that many thousands in there. All coming up with things that have flourishing as part of the purpose. And there are many contemporary philosophers that will say the same thing as well. I even saw, for example, Stephen Law talking about morality a couple of weeks ago and saying, talking about the purpose of morality. And, you know, if it's not about flourishing, then what's the point? You know, what? So it's not a new thought at all. It is one that I'm leaning on the shoulders of great people who have far better minds than I do, both from, you know, ancient Greece to now.
Yeah. Most people, when they're invested in an idea, they have some kind of tunnel vision. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Even some scientists will have it because they're invested in it. They want to show it's right. Again, it's not having the tunnel vision that's bad, because that can help you keep focused and that can help you keep building the idea. It's bad if you come across information that blatantly disproves it and you ignore it.
Yeah. And you know, I noted a few places that did show that you know, there were disagreements to this. There have been over the years. So it's just that there is a big trend with the people who have looked into it in depth that this seems to be part of it. And if one day someone can show me that this is actually wrong, and you know, morality is actually about the best way to eat a cheese sandwich, then of course I'll have to change my opinion on it. But so the next one. I see no foundations for almost all of your assumptions other than your personal opinion, like happy people are more cooperative and productive. This is not the case. Slaves are far more productive, and that's why there's slavery. So, while slaves can be subdued and whipped into shape, we're infringing on basic human rights. We're not allowing the slaves to flourish. The slaves will not be happy. Often they'll revolt. They're kept in such poor conditions that they die. They can be too weak to be productive. You're taking a narrow look on, well, if X culture enslaves Y culture, then it benefits X culture. therefore it should be moral to do so, but that's not taking everything into account. That's not taking the whole picture into account. We're talking about the species rather than just a particular culture. So you can't really just look at it that way. You're not balancing the equation of the harm being caused and the suffering and the benefits and how it affects everything.
I mean, if you go out and look, you'll find psychological studies showing that a happier workplace is a more productive workplace.
Yeah. I mean, I did say to him in a couple of points at the time as well. We're discussing the workforce in a modern society. So bringing up slavery is a little bit irrelevant to it. You know, we're comparing employees that are told to work or you get fired or punished or demoted, and the employers that are given a good place to work and they actually want to be there and they're happy to be there and they try hard because it's being good. I mean, as you say, there's plenty of studies that show that a happy workforce is more productive than a miserable workforce. There are some studies and thoughts that slavery wasn't as economically efficient as people perceived it to be as well. So when I put this up on Answers in Reason to go out, I will include my notes on this in the articles, and you can read that for yourself as well if you want to take the whole picture. I'll put the link about workers being more productive as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, it just sounds like one of those, well, I can imagine a possible world, so therefore your opinion must be subjective. I mean, if you can argue for it and give a good, strong argument for it, it's not necessarily a personal opinion.
Yeah, definitely. More content, please. Says, considering the fact that our brains regenerate through neurogenesis, flourishing seems to make sense. LB says, culture definitely plays a big role. I mean, compare the 50s in America to today. Yes, so descriptively speaking, there are definitely relative elements to morality. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was right then, does it? We look back and we say, no, that culture was wrong to do what they did. We now have learned that it's wrong. It's like changing your scientific theory with new evidence. You've realized that treating these people that way is wrong. And we still make judgments on other cultures about how they behave. Yes, we might be influenced by our own culture. But equally, we might look inwards at ourselves and go, no, I still don't think it's right the way people are treated in the workforce. We don't think that it's, the gender pay gap and things like that. There are plenty of things that we can still say about our own culture that are still immoral. Look at minimum wage.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's one example there that I would argue it's not a livable wage. Even two people earning a minimum wage is not enough to get by. So I agree that it was wrong, but it seems like nationalism is the light version of it. Yeah, so nationalism, we had a stream about that, didn't we? About how nationalism can be good, but generally isn't.
Yeah. It depends on the type of nationalism.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll skirt around that one for now, but we can have a conversation about that at a different time, because that one will probably take us off and we'll be chatting for hours.
Yeah, I'd also have to go back and brush up on it because it was like a couple of years ago I studied it. And I've learned a lot of different stuff since then.
Yeah. Yeah, and more content, please, agrees, white women rarely benefited from chattel slavery. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, so next one. So he was speaking about the point that I made that species are driven to survive at a genetic level, at least most of them. So if that is the case, then you can make an argument that killing homosexuals is a good thing to do, as they are less likely to reproduce and it's a waste to keep them alive.
Okay, but there's also the argument that if you're in a warring tribe that's constantly losing men and women to war, then the homosexuals can adopt the children and look after them.
Yeah. I mean, there's the fact that homosexuality is a perfectly natural place to sit anyway. I mean, the last study I read on it had been observed in over 450 species, but actually, someone sent me a link recently that I've yet to read that it's now up to 1,000 species homosexuality has been seen in. So,
Well, I mean,
and as you
you
said,
could
there's
also,
benefits to homosexuals. You know, they
well,
can
the other
adopt
thing
kids
as
and
well is if you're going to argue that because naturally we're driven to do this thing, therefore naturally it's good to kill homosexuals, you've committed a naturalistic fallacy. Just because it seems to be that way in nature doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. I mean, there's poisonous mushrooms. They're in nature. That doesn't mean they're good.
Yeah, that's true. Plenty of poisonous plants,
Yeah.
and others that make you go wild.
Yeah.
On top of that, I mean, there's plenty of other benefits that I think that we find from homosexuals, more than just um, the ability for them to adopt kids. I mean, they tend to add a bit of diversity to anything. They make the world a bit more fabulous.
Yeah.
um,
Well, the other thing as well is somebody like Aristotle, when he was speaking of human flourishing, he wasn't speaking of the group as a whole and only a group as a whole. He was also speaking of individuals, what it meant to live the best life for them, what it meant for them to flourish, the individual. You killing a homosexual because he's a homosexual isn't allowing them to live the best life that they can.
Agreed. And if his actual point purely comes down to the ability to reproduce, they still can. There's IVF treatment, surrogacy, and all sorts like that. So it's sort of defeated itself on all accounts there.
Yeah, it's another debate bro argument.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. As LB says, cancer is in nature. It doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
He then says, descriptively, moral subjectivism is true. Everyone has different moral values. Yes, people do tend to have different moral values, some from their culture, some from their own internal moral compass. Some of them are objective. I mean, this is speaking descriptively about morality, and this is what I addressed in it. Descriptively, there are subjective, relative, and objective elements to morality.
Yeah, that doesn't really answer the important questions as to whether moral propositions are true.
No, exactly. And he going on his last one about killing homosexuals. There are some societies that deem killing homosexuals is moral because it's considered moral in that society. But does that actually make it moral, or do we hold them to a standard above their personal opinion and say no, what you're doing is wrong? I mean, for a number of things that we've just mentioned in the previous point.
Well, the other thing as well is there's sort of a bit of fallacious thinking going on there. I'm not really sure that everybody has different moral opinions. Most cultures have a sort of shared moral grounding. Um, there's a sort of shared moral grounding across cultures as well. That certain
Especially
things
where
are
there's religious
wrong.
influence, isn't there?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Most Christians have a sort of common moral outlook, even if there might be subtle differences in some of them. Most Christians have a sort of shared common morality. So do Muslims, so do Jainists, Buddhists. So I'm not really sure it's correct to say that everybody has a different moral opinion.
yeah, and in fact, I mean, if you got one of each different religion in a room, and an agnostic and an atheist,
And a deist,
and
just to
yeah,
include LP.
uh, the future atheist.
Well, he challenged me to a fight earlier.
Oh, did he?
He did.
Oh, breakdancing.
Yeah, I know. I break dance every time I stand up. My knee goes, my back goes. But yeah, I'm only joking. He just posted he'd come to obliterate atheists or something like that. So I posted an image of, come on in, let's have it.
Yeah, and what's more, I mean, what we discussed about the descriptive statements, they're talking about how it works in practice as well. Whereas we're trying to find, the way we ought to act rather than the way people do act. The way we're,
Yeah.
you know,
And,
so
and that's the question. Is there a way we ought to act? So just saying, well, everybody has different opinions. Does that mean that everybody ought to have different opinions? Does that mean that we ought to respect those different opinions and allow them to continue?
mm,
Does that mean might makes right? And if we don't like what somebody's doing, we can beat them up?
yeah,
You know, just saying everybody has different opinions about what's moral, therefore morality is subjective. It doesn't really answer the bigger questions.
yeah. No, I agree. And I mean, back to the point on if you got one person from every religion and an atheist and an agnostic all in a room, and you all ask the same question of, is it moral to rape a baby? I think pretty much every one of them would say no.
Yeah.
uh, there might be some weirdos out there that might think it is, but
And
yes.
would those people arguing that morality is subjective, would they say, "Oh well, here's my baby, go babysit them"? It's okay to do what you want with it because right and wrong is all based on personal opinion.
And the baby's not old enough to actually have opinions yet, so only yours matters in the situation anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. People don't look at the bigger questions or the questions that follow from it. They only look at, well, here's a statement that proves you wrong. Therefore, I'm right.
Yeah. Yeah. Can't argue with that.
Of course not. It's all subjective.
So, subjective and relative morality is how democracy works. We give our opinion, and the popular opinion changes laws. I don't see how we can replace it with an objective moral framework like a theocracy. Well, laws are not moral statements, even though they can be based on them. Right. Popular opinion doesn't necessarily make something right. I mean, if there's lots of evidence and there is a mass consensus, then it indicates that that is probably right. But just because everybody decides to do something doesn't make it right. And how something might work in practice doesn't necessarily tell us what is right or wrong, just what people believe is right or wrong.
Yeah, and I think in some cases people aren't really understanding the terms that they're using, or they're committing a kind of equivocation fallacy in that when speaking about morality, relative means that the culture is the truth maker. But when they're using the term relative, they're meaning it to say, well, it's relative to the situation, which isn't quite the same thing as moral relativity.
No. It's more speaking about a nuance, which, as we discussed, I've been saying as we discussed so much, we should count how many times I've said as we discussed in the previous stream. I've forgotten what I was saying. Oh yeah, you can. A nuance doesn't make something subjective. Something can be objective and still have a nuance to it, because you can look at a situation, the context of it, and that can still go, well, actually, with these parameters, this is what's best, and with these parameters, that's what's best. If you think about a car journey, you might say that for me to get from here to Scotland, that there is the best route. But if I'm going at 4 p.m., there's a good chance that halfway down the route, I'm going to hit I'm going to hit school traffic for one. Then I'm going to hit out of work traffic. I mean, not at the moment because we're all on lockdown, but And then all of a sudden, actually, maybe taking some of the smaller roads would be faster. They're still both objective statements. It's just adding a bit of context to the statement.
Yeah. And there can be context depending on the moral theory that you use. Like value pluralism would definitely involve a lot of context.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm putting you through this pain as well, Dave.
I don't suffer pain. I'm not smart enough.
Even if the purpose is objectively flourishing, your judgment is still completely subjective. I mean, we already addressed the judgment being completely subjective thing. You can have an objective statement and subjectively decide whether that you're going to listen to it or not. Again, we can go for the car thing. I mean, you're going across country and you might put it into different sat navs. You go, oh, well, there's Google Maps and there's TomTom. Google Maps is telling me to go this way and TomTom's telling me to go this way. They're both objective routes. But there's obviously something in the programming, or one of them hasn't been updated as much or anything like that. Now, these routes can also change, as we discussed before, school traffic and all of that. But they're generally giving you, under perfect conditions, this is the route to go right now. Yes, I can say that you will subjectively decide which you're going to listen to, but I have personally experimented with a number of different devices. I don't know if you have when doing your journeys. I think I've used Waze, Garmin, Google, TomTom. Sure, there were 5. Okay, so I haven't used every single one that's out there, but I can remember 4. I think it was 5. And from doing different journeys with them, the same journeys, going to work and things like that, I found that Google Maps tended to give me the best route. Waze would sometimes come up with something that was like, oh, nip down here, and you might cut a few minutes off. But sometimes it sent you on such a long roundabout on impossible roads, and it ended up taking me an extra hour. I've now got evidence that I'm basing my judgment on, 90% of the time Google Maps gave me the best route, so chances are it will give me the best route, So, yes, I could still subjectively decide to ignore Google Maps. But
one way I can think of putting this is imagine something like preference satisfaction utilitarianism. Just go with simple preference satisfaction for now, though. Imagine that morality is based on the satisfaction of preferences.
Mm-hmm.
So an action is moral if it satisfies preferences. You might have a different preference to, say, me. So whether or not your preferences might be subjective, but that wouldn't change the fact that it's objectively determined by preference satisfaction. So it's sort of a fallacy of division to say, well, because the bits of it are subjective, that makes the whole thing subjective. Well, no, it's still objectively determined by whether or not preferences were satisfied. Doesn't matter that the different people have different preferences. It's still judged on whether or not the preferences were satisfied. Does that make sense?
It does indeed. You can't use well-being as a measure for morality, as it's not quantifiable and the judgment on it is completely subjective.
Okay, but it's still judged on well-being. Therefore, still objective in that we ignore personal opinions about what it's based on and we judge it on well-being.
Yeah. And yes, there could be a bit of subjectivity to how one experiences the harm. I mean, say we both got punched in the face exactly the same way. You stand there and go, pff, and I fall on the floor crying. Exactly the same punch. It affected us differently. So I can understand that that could maybe make you think, um, but again, you say you're using the well-being, you do it to the relation of flourishing. You could, all the studies for abuse and violence and all of that sort of thing. We might say that it's a less bad action for it happening to you because you barely felt it, but we'd still say that it was wrong. They've encroached on your personal space and body autonomy. They didn't get your consent. Um, so they've encroached on forms of well-being, even if you don't feel too harmed by it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, if you consider something like measuring a carpet to fit your living room, you use meters, I use feet. Yeah. We've both chosen a different method of measuring it, but it's still objectively this length.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you put it through a calculation and convert from one to the other, they should be very, very close to each other as well.
Yeah.
Okay. You can have objective morals. Suddenly a turnaround. But only
Cheers.
once. Yeah, thank you. But only once you have a goal, and the goals are subjective.
Okay. I suppose this again boils down to, well, I don't agree that the goal of morality is X. I think it's Y, therefore it's subjective. But they never consider the fact that, well, maybe they're just wrong about the objective of morality
Mm, yes. And
or the goal of morality.
without going into everything I said earlier as well, I mean, we've looked at it throughout the years, and that's what it seems to be the case. That's and as I explained in the does morality have a purpose? Something that might have been subjective can move through being intersubjectively agreed, and then an objective standard in itself. So something that can go from being subjective to being objective. And as you say, just because people don't necessarily agree with the purpose of morality doesn't make the goal subjective.
Yeah. Or two
um,
people having different opinions about something doesn't mean that it's subjective.
yeah.
It depends, really. I mean, the one question that comes to mind with a lot of these is, how many of these people have ever actually picked up a book on ethics or morality? Or say, gone beyond their favorite YouTuber, or
Yeah.
gone beyond the discussions in the Facebook groups inside where they normally go, where it's full of people who all agree with them, and that's why they use that group, because everybody agrees with them, and therefore they think, well, everybody in this group must be smart because they agree with me. How many of them have picked up like the Nicomachean ethics, or just like a companion to ethics, or anything like that?
Yeah. Probably not many.
No.
I think a lot of it comes down to the contrarian nature of a lot of our fellow atheists who are looking for a contradiction to whatever the theists say.
I'm a
Theists,
skeptic, therefore I have to doubt anything you say.
yeah,
Yeah.
or the well, theists say that without God, morality is subjective, but God doesn't exist, so therefore morality is subjective, and that's pretty much their whole. That's
Yeah.
as far as I've looked into it, and all other atheists say, as you say, you get the confirmation bias there, and morality is far more complicated than a simple subjective versus objective debate. I know it seems like I'm heavily arguing on the objective side, and I do think that normatively morality is objective, and descriptively it's a combination of all of them. But uh, I think that there is, when someone is arguing so heavily and poorly for subjectivism and sort of contradicting themselves from one statement to the next. Perhaps that's because of things that I said throughout conversations. Um, they changed their opinion on certain bits, but then went, but what about, and on to the next bit. I don't know. But yeah, you might be pleased to know that that was the last one from that person, but it's not the last one.
A lot of bad arguments from one person.
Yeah. Enough to actually do a whole video on it that's taken us over an hour.
Yeah. Again, he should pick up a book on ethics. Just start doing some actual reading. That's all I can say.
Yeah. There was one that I didn't get a chance to actually do. Someone posted a video in our Facebook group and went, basically, this was someone who for ages has been telling me he wanted to have a conversation on morality with us, was going to come on the stream, but work happened and all of that. And he basically turned around and went, Alan Watts says objective morality is a fool's errand. Watch this video. It's 18 for the first 18 minutes of this video, and it tells you why. And I just thought, well, it's a bit of an argument from authority for one. Okay, not necessarily a bad one, but didn't actually address any of the points in the previous video, and didn't explain why he agreed with Alan Watts. Alan Watts may put together a good argument, but I don't, I haven't watched it, and we might address that in a future stream. But if you can't say, well, Alan Watts says this, which contradicts this point, this point, this point, this point. So what do you think about that? How would you answer that or anything? It just seemed a bit like, well, so-and-so said it's wrong. So, and that agrees with me. So I'm going with that. It seemed like a fallacious argument from authority, even though he is someone who knows his stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there are ethicists that argue that morality is subjective. Not subjective in the sense that there are personal opinions and morality gets its truth from those personal opinions, but that morality isn't built on propositions. Something like error theory. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah. So morality is more an expression of an opinion, and it holds no real weight. There is no real right and wrong. There is only preferences of what people would like and what people wouldn't like to happen. So there are good arguments for forms of moral subjectivism. But most ethicists argue that there is a form of moral realism, that there are moral propositions. It really depends on which arguments you go for.
Yeah. Fair. I mean, it might be worth addressing them in a future stream.
I mean, here's a hint for anybody who wants to argue for that morality is subjective. Go learn error theory. You might have an argument then, and a decent argument.
Yeah. Fair. The last one that I've got, I don't know if you've picked up any others from your conversations, Dave. What about the difference between ethics and morality? So, I mean, this one I thought was actually an interesting question because generally in philosophy, there is no real difference between ethics and morality, but there are some that might say ethics is the study of morality.
Yeah. There are some arguments that there is a distinction between ethics and morality, in that ethics is more of group behavior and morality is based on personal behavior, personal codes.
Yeah, so
ethics is a group code. So you have a code of ethics for a club, and then you have morality for your own personal opinions. But generally in philosophy, ethics and morality are the same thing.
well, Kevin actually said that in French, ethics refers mostly to moral autonomy or moral self-conduct, whilst morals refer to rules and sets of conduct. It is so in effect, ethics is to say it's thinking about morality and acting good, while morality is just good or bad, regardless of your thoughts on it. So, for example, virtue ethics is regarded as ethics because there's no set rules, but deontology is morals or morality because it has set rules.
As the
Um,
rule.
and utilitarianism counts as both. It's got ethics, but there's a few rules about what is good in there. But he was wondering if that was actually just a French philosophy thing.
No, I mean that there are those arguments that go on, but generally, in when I've learned it, it's ethics is simply the study of morality.
Yeah, and of course, there's also another distinction that is made by many non-philosophically minded atheists and skeptics, and they say that morality is just your personal morals and ethics is society's agreed morals. So using this definition, that's why they say morality is subjective, because they've defined morality as subjective rules, and ethics is relative because they've defined it as moral relativism. But I mean, that's not how morality and ethics are normatively described. It's sort of like a creationist discussing evolution, going, yeah, it's just a changing kind. You could almost argue that it's a bit of a straw man of what ethics and morality is.
Yeah, kind of. Like I say, there is arguments that there is a distinction to be made.
But not that one.
Yeah, not that one.
Right. I think that was it. Are there any more questions coming in from the chat, or do you have any other ones that have popped up recently that you've got to go on, Dave?
No, not really. I've not really been discussing that much.
Yeah, fair.
I generally try to avoid discussions about morality with other skeptics and atheists simply because I don't find it fruitful. I find it more frustrating because people don't want to listen to you; they just want to tell you.
Hmm.
Um, and when you've actually studied some of this, it makes it even more frustrating.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, I haven't gone to the lengths that you have, but I do tend to find the conversations ever more frustrating. There are some good ones. I mean, that's how we met Josh, wasn't it? Me having a
Yeah.
conversation on morality, and then that was, I mean, I'm still learning now, but that was when I just had my mind blown that, oh my God, there could be objective elements to morality. Oh my God, but all the other atheists say.
That's what I'm here for. But yeah, I mean, there are people that will listen, and if I find those people, I do enjoy a discussion with them.
Mm,
It's just generally I don't, because there's a lot of dogpiling that happens when you discuss morality with other skeptics and atheists.
mm.
They will just all pile on and pile on and pile on until your voice is drowned out in this chorus of people all saying the same thing and nobody listening.
Oh, you see it on Twitter all the time, especially when it is against a theist talking about morality and it being objective, and then you suddenly see, someone's quote tweeted it, and then there's hundreds of comments of morality is subjective, morality is subjective, morality is subjective, and you're just like,
Yeah, it's almost like they've got a macro key.
yeah. LB says that deist ethics, in his view, is reason, naturalistic theology, question God's nature, mix of egalitarianism, and he may make one someday. It's more of a personal philosophy than a particular code.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing about deism. There's theories about what God might be like or what
Mm,
God might want from us, but it's not like religion where this is what God wants from us. It's Deism is sort of like religion in its infancy, where people were trying to figure God out. Um, so yeah, it can be quite. I kind of like some of the deist arguments. They can be quite interesting.
mm.
I don't accept them, and I don't think they're correct, but they're interesting. And most deists are interesting to have a conversation with because they're not dogmatic about it.
No, there's
Yeah,
generally no real dogma to it at all, is there?
no.
Which makes it again a more fruitful conversation. Like we were talking about how some atheists can be very dogmatic in their responses to things like morality, and it makes it unpleasurable. You can get some theists who are very dogmatic, and this is what it is because it says so in my book, and blah 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 blah. And my priest said, then you know, when you find someone that's actually interested in having a conversation, yeah, it's generally a lot more pleasurable.
Yeah, and if you approach it, it's the same with pantheists, or panpsychists. I enjoy conversations with those kind of people because even if I don't accept the arguments and don't find them compelling, having a civil conversation with somebody who thinks so different to you can help challenge your own ideas.
Mm,
Never mind challenging their ideas, it can help challenge your own.
yeah. And that's a good thing. And we should all allow ourselves to be challenged and never get too happy in our opinions. And, you know, I've had my mind change, especially since doing these streams with you, Dave. Not just the video ones, but the fresh air ones, the podcasts and stuff like that. And there are still times when I hear a different argument and I go, ooh, and it causes me, I finally got to a point where I thought I was happy with my opinion on something. And actually, I've heard something so different. Well, what about this? How does it fit in? Does it completely change my mind, or is it something that is more of a nuance that it could be the case sometimes, but not always? And it's brilliant. Keep yourself thinking and find these things. Stop being so repulsed by new information, especially all of you atheists and skeptics out there that say you'll change your mind with new information and evidence and things like that, who then get presented it and go, no, it's wrong.
Yeah. It's sort of kind of interesting talking about this now because it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. How do you know you have all the information? Well,
Yeah.
that's the thing. Even in something like this, we can't know that we have all the information. And if we start thinking we have all the information, we're never going to start learning anything new. We're never going to actually change our minds, critique our own views. It'll be, well, I already know it all. I'm a
Yeah.
skeptic. I'm an atheist. Therefore, I'm smart. I'm rational. I know everything. Anything anybody else says is wrong. They're never skeptical about anything that they think and they believe. Only others. So having actual decent, intelligent conversations with other people can stop us falling into that trap.
Yeah, no, definitely. As many different people as you can, and try and keep it respectful as well.
Yeah.
Ask questions and listen and process. And if you need to, say, I need to think about on this some more and come back. I mean, the pair of us are quite strong atheists, and we facepalm our fellow atheists more than we do other people we see online. It could be
Yeah.
quite embarrassing to be associated with some of the behaviors you see online, and hopefully you realize we're not as bad. I mean, we're still a pair of dicks, but
You can only have a singular penis.
Malachi says you don't know about morality, you can't speak on it. Well, we've got a few blog posts on Answers in Reason. If you look up what is the purpose of morality, it's got lots of references in there to various articles and books and things on morality, and also to podcasts. We also did a stream about a month ago called Morality and Misconceptions, which is what inspired this video from the feedback that we've got on it. So if you are interested, that's a good one to watch. It depends on whether you're a reader or a watcher. I am definitely more of a reader myself. He says doing a YouTube video. A lot of that is because how split my time is, and I can find it difficult to find the time to sit there and watch something when if there's an article I can sit there and read it, and I can read a lot faster than it takes me to watch something. So and also this video is answering the feedback we got from it. So if you've only just joined in, then Yeah, it might be worth listening to some of this, but I'd say it's probably better to get a more or grounded level on morality. The short of it is morality is the principles of good, bad, right, wrong behavior. The purpose of morality seems to be human flourishing. There are two distinct ways to discuss morality, descriptively and normatively. So, descriptively, it's talking about how things work in practice. So, you might compare two different cultures. Normatively is saying the way we ought to behave. So, descriptive statements are what people believe to be right or wrong, doesn't tell us what is right or wrong. Normatively are supposed to be statements that are right or wrong, regardless of what people to believe. There's tons of theories out there that are worth looking into. If I was to choose one, I think I'd point you in the direction of virtue ethics, but it's also the hardest one. Takes a lot of work.
Wasn't hard for
I'm
me.
sorry.
Wasn't hard for me.
That's just because you're so virtuous, Dave. Whereas I'm a complete bellend. So it takes, even more effort for me.
No, it wasn't easy for me. It was goddamn hard work scoring that distinction. Um, for Malachi, one of the things I would suggest is going to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. They're always a great starting resource, or the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And they always have great articles. Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy is probably easier to read,
Yeah.
but has less depth.
Mhm.
Whereas Stanford is harder to read and has more depth. So if you start with, say, something like moral realism in the Stanford Encyclopedia, and then follow through in the different suggestions and things that it gives you, you'll start to learn a lot more. And once you get going with ethics, it's actually an incredibly fascinating topic.
Yeah. Yeah. It keeps me awake at night. And you're agnostic too. Excellent. It's always good to have someone down there of a different ontological position and understands that agnostic is its own ontological position as well. um, so LB says another thing is it's so damn satisfying when a lacktheist hears and changes their mind. It's a rare occurrence, but when it happens, it's like yes.
Yeah,
I don't know if he said it that way, but it
he seems
is.
like quite an excitable person, so I would imagine that's the way he did it.
I'm sure he actually said the whole thing double speed as well, and got
Yeah,
higher pitch towards the end.
yeah, he's an awesome dude.
um, yeah, no, you're right. It's anything like that. It's even when someone goes, I need to think on that more. I call that a win. Even if they then think about it and go, well, I've thought about it, and these are the reasons why I still think my point is right. It's nice that someone's actually taken the time to really consider it. I find it really frustrating when someone, and you see this especially on Twitter, is fighting for a position. This is my position. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. And you're like, okay. There's so much battleground mentality. I mean, social media is bad for it in general, but I think because Twitter has such short messages, it instigates far greater battleground mentality.
Yeah, and it's very tribal on places like Twitter and Facebook. Very tribal.
Yeah. It's one of the sort of good things and bad things about some of the debate groups on Facebook. Sometimes you can find a debate group that has a nice lot of people and it's all a nice, respectful conversation. But other groups that you go into, they can just be one side has won.
Yeah,
And whether it's heavily atheist or heavily theist, it's the dogmatic kind of theist or atheist. And anyone who says anything different is bam,
yeah.
put down.
Some of them are also set up by one side in order to lure the other side in, and then sort of trap them into a sort of sense where they can't really say anything. They're just argued against and like dogpiled and screamed at, and nobody ever really gets the opposite side because they're just shouted down immediately, and then everybody cheers and dances. Oh, we've seen off the atheist or the theist.
Yeah, it's embarrassing.
It is.
Awesome. Well, if there's no more questions and you've got no more points, the last thing I need to say is tomorrow we're doing a live recording of a Fresh Air video / podcast. It's Patreon only. And on Thursday we're back discussing your
What's in the box argument.
What's in the box article. Yes, that's it. God, my mind.
What's one of them? I lost mine a long time ago.
So I will probably see most of you on Thursday for the next episode of SciPhi. But if you can attend to tomorrow on Patreon, that'd be awesome as well. Anyway, have yourselves a fantastic night. You've been listening to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave, apparently.
Have a good one.
Good night, all. Thanks for joining us. It was really enjoyable.
And yes, the usual streams are Tuesday and Thursday, 8 till about 10, sometimes longer. And we are going to be throwing in the odd extra stream where we can.
Yeah. We usually gab till we got nothing more to say.
You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, all under Answers in Reason, or get us at answersandreason.com. Have a good one, all.
Good night.